You can think of a variable as a container that stores information. You give a variable a name and then you assign it a value. Values can be numbers, text strings, and elements in the DOM, or a function, really anything you want it to be. This gives us a convenient way to reference the value later by this particular name. The value itself can be modified and reassigned in whatever way our script's logic dictates. Before you can actually use a variable, you need to announce that you want to use it. This involves creating the variable and giving it a name. Programmers say that you declare the variable. You can see from our example here, we have var quantity. Var is the variable keyword and quantity is the variable name. Var is an example of what programmers call a keyword. The JavaScript interpreter knows that this keyword is used to create variables. In order to use the variable, you must give it a name. This is also referred to as an identifier. In this case, the variable name is called quantity. If a variable name is more than one word, it's usually written in camel case, which means that the first word is all lowercased and any subsequent words have their first letter capitalized. You don't include any spaces. There are a few rules that you must follow when naming a variable. One is that all variables are case sensitive. Two is it must start with a letter, a $sign, or an underscore. It also may contain letters, digits, and underscores, and any combination of those. You cannot start a variable name with a number. The name cannot contain any periods or dashes. You cannot put spaces into a variable name. And finally, you don't want to include any funky or special characters. These would be things like exclamation, the @ symbol, commas, slashes, pluses, etc. Once you've actually created a variable, then you can tell it what information you would like it to store for you. Programmers say that you assign a value to the variable. You can see down here I have a variable and I've set it equal to 8. Once again, quantity is the variable name. The variable value is 8, and the equal sign is what we call an assignment operator. You can now use the variable by its name. So here we set the value for the variable and called it quantity. Where possible, a variable's name should describe the kind of data that the variable holds. The equal sign is an assignment operator. It says that you're going to assign a value to the variable. It's also used to update the value given to a variable. Until you've assigned a value to a variable, programmers say that the value is undefined. Where in your script that a variable is actually declared can affect whether the rest of the script can use it. Programmers refer to this as the scope of a variable, and we'll talk more in detail about this a little bit later on. The values we assign to variables fall under a few distinct data types. The simplest of all these data types is likely undefined. If we declare a variable by giving it a name but assigning no value, the variable contains a value of undefined. Here's an example of what that looks like. Here I have var my variable. If I then ran an alert on my variable, this is just going to open a dialog box containing undefined. Here I have a very simple web page, and I'm just going to insert some of these examples so you can see how they're going to work. Within the head tag, I've created a script tag, and the script tag simply contains my var keyword, the name of my variable, and then I'm asking the browser to run an alert and specify my variable. Because this is undefined, when we look at this in the browser and we run the page, you can see that I'd simply get an alert box that just lets me know this is a JavaScript alert and it's undefined. The odds are you won't find a lot of use for this right away, but it's worth knowing just for the sake of troubleshooting some of the errors that you're likely to encounter early on in your JavaScript career. If a variable has a value of undefined when it shouldn't, you might want to double check and make sure that it has been declared correctly or that there isn't a typo in the variable name. Null is similar to undefined. Assigning a variable of null, again, this is case sensitive, simply says define this variable but give it no inherent value. Here's the text to define a null data type. If we run this in our code and look at it in our page, you can see that I simply get an error message that simply just says null. You can assign variables numeric values. If we do this, then the variable behaves the same as the number itself, so you can do things to it that you would do to other numbers using classic mathematical notations, things like addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. To assign a number to a variable, you simply specify the number, and if we save and check this in the browser, you can see that I get an alert box that just spits out 8 as the value. If I change my alert to perform a mathematical calculation by just adding in a plus sign inside the alert, you're going to see that now the value is going to change to 16. So here's the new value based on using the plus sign to add the variable to itself. One other thing to note in regards to numeric data is that if you're using very large numbers, for instance, if I was going to assign my variable to be equal to 8,250, I would write it like this. I would not include the comma between the thousandths and the hundredths. In addition to that, you can also use negative numbers for your variables, and to do that you would simply put a minus sign in front of the variable name. You can also add decimal points to your variables by adding a period and then stringing in the amount of decibels that you're interested in using. Numbers are not only used for things like calculators, but they also are used for tasks such as determining the size of the screen, moving the position of an element on the page, or setting the amount of time that an element should take to fade in. The next type of variable that we're going to talk about is a string. A string is basically a line of text. Enclosing the characters in single or double quotes indicates that it's a string. It doesn't matter if you use the single or the double quotes, but the opening quote must match the closing quote. Strings can be used when working with any kind of text. They're frequently used to add new content to the page, and they can contain HTML markup as well. Let's look at an example of utilizing a string. If we go back into the page and we set the variable value to a string, you can see that my alert box now regurgitates the code that we specified in the string. Ours now says hello out there. In addition, it is possible to stick strings together. This is called concatenation, and it will create one long string. So if I change the value of my string to say bye, and in the alert I'm going to type my variable plus my variable. And if we save our page and view it in the browser, you can see that it now displays bye bye. Strings don't have to only contain characters, but they could also contain numbers. So if I change the value of my string to 8, but I put it inside of quotation marks, and I perform some addition on the variables, what we got before was a value of 16. You're going to see now, when we look at our page in the browser, that the JavaScript alert displays 88. As long as the value is displayed inside the quotes, whatever the value is just treated as the actual text that you've typed. Utilizing the plus sign simply sticks the strings together into one long string. Another commonly used data type is Boolean data types. Boolean data types can have one of two values, either true or false. I like to think of Boolean data types a little bit like a light switch. It's either on or off. Booleans are very helpful when determining which part of a script should run. We'll be using this in future exercises. An example of a Boolean data type is simply to specify that the variable is equal to true or false. If we save and we preview in the browser, you can see that the alert box is going to simply specify true. Boolean values, the true and false, are actually keywords that are built into JavaScript. So when we use the Boolean value of true or false, we don't incorporate the quotation marks like we do with strings. If we were to wrap the value inside of the quotation marks, we'd be saving the word true to the variable instead of the inherent value of true, which also means that something is not false. In a sense, everything in JavaScript has either an inherently true or false value.